Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Kelly Violet, Executive Director of the Tomball Economic Development Corporation. I want to thank you for joining us today for our webinar titled From Fragile to Fearless, the 5 Practices of Cultures that Thrive Under Pressure. We all know that when organizations hit a moment of crisis or some rapid growth, most of the teams struggle, but the strongest get sharper, faster, and more courageous under pressure. Today, we're going to explore exactly what sets those teams apart. I'm pleased to introduce our speaker, Brian Wallace, a seasoned culture strategist, facilitator, and executive advisor with more than 30 years of experience helping leaders build accountable, resilient, high-performing teams. Brian holds a master's degree from Oakland City University, the SPHR certification, and leads HR strategies now. As the creator of the Climb program, he specializes in turning culture into a measurable strategic advantage. We're excited to have Brian walk us through the 5 practices that help organizations reduce friction, increase accountability, and execute with confidence under pressure. Brian, let's get started.
Sounds great. Thank you, Kelly. I appreciate the introduction, and it's a pleasure to meet everybody and pleasure to be in front of you today. We have all worked in environments where some of the time you hear about the organizational values. They might hang on the lobby wall, but when it comes time to actually translating those into the day-by-day action, it becomes a little more nebulous, if you will. And so today we're going to be talking about how to take an organization and its values and its culture from being fragile to fearless, and the work that's required to do that. So let's get into it. Excited to be joining you. Okay, so the first thing that I'd like to encourage you to do is to use the QR code in the upper left-hand corner. And I'd like to get just a few words from you as to what you believe is the business impact of a courageous culture. And we'll give it just a couple of minutes. So we see high performance and greater profitability. Absolutely. Are there others? Loyalty is a big one. Those are some great, and ownership, of course, that's great. So those are some great words associated with a courageous culture. And what do we mean by a courageous culture? Basically, that is an organization where employees are truly bought into the organization's vision. They're empowered to make the decisions that they need to make in order to move the business forward. They're willing and able and confident to step forward with new ideas and to address dysfunction. So a courageous culture is all about creating an environment where people can fully lean in to the organization and its vision and build a stronger, higher performing team. Okay. So the thing that is important to realize here is that most culture problems don't start with failure. They start with silence. And what I mean by that is if you walk into some organizations and you experience a situation where people are just not communicating openly, or they're pulled back, or they're not sharing ideas, or perhaps they're shying away from their overall responsibilities, a big part of that is really based on the leadership actions where they're creating an environment where people feel that it's necessary to pull back and basically protect. Okay, so Uh, the key here is that there are a lot of companies that will also allow culture to develop on its own, just out of default. And that's really a mistake, because the companies that are going to perform at the highest possible level are those that are very intentional about building a culture that's going to create the right type of practices and environment for that leaning in and ownership on the part of employees. So, just to step back for just a moment, if you think about that word cloud that we're just creating, some of the words that you didn't see in that word cloud included things like burnout and overly stressed and withdrawn and dysfunction. Okay. That's because those are the types of things that happen in a culture that's fragile. And we'll talk about the difference between those two in a little while. Okay. So most cultures start with, or most culture problems, that is, don't start with failure. They start with silence. So the pressure hits, people pull back, the truth hides, and then teams begin to stall. So culture is always your leading manner of how the business is performing and how it's going to perform long term. Okay. It's the underlying current in how the business actually operates day by day. Okay. It's always leading your business, but the question is, where is it leading your business and how? Okay. So in my studies, as was mentioned earlier, I've been working on this for well over 30 years, supporting different organizations, some very large, some very small, some international, some here in the US. And what I found is that culture and the description that you would use for that culture can often be broken down into 5 different levels. Okay. So first of all, the first level is complacent. And this is where employees are going to be hired. They're brought in for a specific task. They're going to do what they're told. They don't typically bring a whole lot of ownership and engagement to the business itself. So there's a lack of engagement and there's a lack of urgency. Okay, these are the people who are basically going to just do what they're told. Then you can also find some where they're at least compliant, which means that they're obedient, but they're uninvested. And I guess one other way to describe the difference between these two, complacent cultures are those where people just don't have a strong sense of ownership, and they really don't care to gain that ownership or that urgency. So compliant teams are those that are going to be obedient, but they're not quite invested. Okay. These are environments where you have to be very particular about setting very clear expectations, and you need to be staying on top of every metric, every KPI, to make sure that the job is getting done. Now, if you think about complacent or compliant environments, what does that do to the overall mindset, health, and stress of the business owner? Well, typically it's going to raise the stress level and the frustration, and it's going to basically take a lot out of that individual. And that's no fun to lead an organization like that. Okay. But at least when you can get to cooperative, now this is where things start to change a little bit. In a cooperative environment, everything is nice. Everybody understands the general idea of what they want to do or what they need to do within their particular roles and responsibilities. But it is, as I mentioned before, it's nice. Okay. And everybody is polite. Everybody's working together properly. But there's a lack of positive tension, if you will, in that organization. And there's a lack of people bringing new ideas forward. It's basically going with the status quo. Okay. If you take another step, then now we're looking at those who are committed. And these teams are the ones that are basically going to have a clear understanding about what needs to be done. They know the vision inside and out. They're bought into it, and they're going to work aggressively to move forward toward that vision. Okay. When people are committed, then they are exhibiting what I call discretionary energy. And this is where they could be doing something a little bit different. They could be spending their time differently, but they choose to engage actively in their day-by-day responsibilities. Okay, these are the people that you typically want on your team, especially when you're looking for consistent, strong performance. Now, there's one level above this, though, and that's the courageous culture. So courageous cultures are those that are considered bold and resilient, and the ones that are aligned under stress. So when you've got a courageous culture, you have a team that becomes very tight in its nature. You have people who are clearly understanding the overall values and vision and mission of the organization. They're bought into it fully, and they're willing to, as I said before, lean in and put additional pressure, perhaps on themselves, to continue moving that ball forward to the point where they can actually accomplish far more than what they could if they were simply committed. So a courageous culture is oftentimes one where people are willing to demonstrate courage in and of themselves when they're bringing new ideas forward, when they're addressing dysfunction, when they're finding that there's a particular challenge that's in front of the business that needs to be overcome. So they're much more adept and willing to fully lean into that organization, into that situation. So another way to look at this is you've got fragile cultures or you've got fearless cultures. Okay. So a fragile culture, of course, is going to be one where people are hiding the tension. Everything's fine. Everything's just, nothing is rocking the boat right at the moment. And it's delicate. It's hard to know exactly where to stand or to step in that situation. And truth is typically avoided. And then finally, it often cracks under pressure. So in comparison to that, you have a fearless culture, and that's also known as a courageous culture. But basically, this is an organization that embraces tension, that speaks truth early and often. Mistakes are brought forward without any problems. And then people are performing better because, I apologize, but people are performing better because of positive pressure. Okay, so the reason that this matters is that courageous or fearless cultures tend to be 23% more profitability, or have 23% greater profitability. And these organizations, or these metrics are coming from a wide variety of sources, including Gallup and Society for Human Resources Management, and Forbes articles, and Fortune magazine, Harvard Business Review. But there are lots of studies that show that typically an organization where people are fully engaged and motivated and courageous in their actions, they tend to be 23% more profitable than those who would fall, let's say, in the bottom quartile of a 4-quartile comparison between highly engaged and low engagement. Okay. They also experience 60% lower turnover. And that means that you have fewer of your high performers that are actually leaving the company. I'll get into the implications of that in just a moment. They tend to have 4 times the revenue growth potential when teams are highly engaged and bought into a courageous culture. 4 times the possible revenue of those that are typically considered a fragile culture or a weak culture. Okay. As a result of all of that, they tend to have stronger stakeholder returns. And this could be a board of directors. It could be constituents in some political organizations or government organizations. It could also be, when you think about the owners of the company themselves, or co-owners, partners. Okay. When you have more profitability, lower turnover, 4 times the revenue growth potential, then you've got something much greater to offer when it comes to the stakeholder returns. The thing is that culture isn't soft. It's your system for execution. Okay? You can have the best strategies in the world. You can have the ideal technology. You can do everything that you want to do to create the right type of product. But unless you have the culture that's running beneath it, that powers that strategy and powers those tactics, then your product is never going to reach its client base, or your service, that is. It's never going to reach the client base if you don't have that strong, powerful culture beneath it. Okay. Now, the cost of a fragile culture, and this is where CPAs typically, I'm sorry, not CPAs, but CFOs typically get engaged and lean in. But the cost of a fragile culture, the turnover is typically 1.5 to 2 times the departing employee's salary. So if you have, just by way of math, if you have, or simple math, if you have, let's say, an employee who's making $100,000, then you can plan on spending anywhere from $150,000 to $200,000 if that employee chooses to leave. Now, that includes advertising costs, it includes interviews, it includes staff time, it includes training and development, but that's even not to mention the loss of the knowledge base when somebody that's a high-performing employee walks out the door. Okay. You've also got the cost of disengagement. So disengaged teams tend to be 17% less productive. Okay. That means that could be in the form of productivity drag. It could be from confusion, dysfunction. It could be dealing with toxic bosses. It basically pushes down the productivity of the organization, 17% on average. Then you've got decision drag and rework that comes along with it. So if people are not courageous, if they're not working in a healthy organizational culture, then they're tending to slow everything down. They're tending to not make the decisions that need to be made, and they're tending to create problems when it comes to the actual product or service. That requires rework, and that rework is very expensive. Okay. You also have lower profitability, and that comes from all of the 3 elements that we mentioned earlier. That includes turnover, that includes disengagement, decision drag. It also comes in the form of lost sales. Okay. Lost opportunities for people as they are otherwise supposed to be identifying opportunities for optimization and better execution. Okay? If those types of things are not happening, then that's going to impact your profitability. Okay. Also, failure to identify and execute on the best opportunities that are out there. So if people are not courageous, if they're working in a fragile culture, they're tending to pull back, and they're tending to not step forward as aggressively as they possibly could. The tax on this, and the way that this all translates into the profitability equation, you oftentimes have redundant meetings, you have slow decisions, you have negative brand impact, because we all know that if a customer service representative, for example, is not bought into the nature of what the business is doing and how it's running, they're never going to deliver the best service that they could to that organization and to those customers. Okay. You've got accountability challenges and things falling through the cracks because people are not taking full ownership. You have conflict avoidance, where it's just easier to go along and get along instead of bringing the right ideas forward, and sometimes creating a little bit of positive tension that actually helps the best decisions to be made. Okay. You got blame and bottlenecks. People are hesitant to make decisions, and they start blaming one another if things are not done properly. Okay. As a result of all of that, you have leadership overfunctioning, because they're feeling like they've got the weight of the world on their shoulders, and they're the only ones who can really keep the business rolling as effectively as it possibly could. And then also you've got a higher level of stress. Now, as a business owner, I can tell you, and I work with many others, that the stress that's created from trying to run a business that does not have a positive and productive and courageous culture is very high. And you tend not only to carry that with you during the day, but unfortunately, you also carry that with you at night when you go home. Okay. And it's very difficult, and it creates additional challenges for the family. Okay. As a result of all of that, you also have stakeholder frustration that things are not moving along as aggressively as they could. Okay. The thing is, fragile cultures bleed margin and momentum. They slow everything down, and they will never be as profitable as they possibly could. So, how do you deal with that? Okay, how do you create an organization where people are truly bought in and engaged and courageous, where you're moving from being fragile, as I mentioned before, to fearless? Okay, so number one, you need to lead with clarity, not comfort. If you can imagine for just a moment, let's say, just envision this with me. If you're driving a beautiful sports car out in California and you're driving up along the Napa Valley coast and everything is great, you've got a beautiful sunny day, you've got the music playing, it's just perfect environment. Well, you're going, let's say 70 miles an hour up the interstate, but then suddenly you hit a fog bank. What is your natural tendency in that case? Oftentimes, the thing is that people will tend to pull back. They'll tend to slow down. They'll tend to possibly put up their convertible top. They'll turn the radio down. And the reason is because they're having to focus even more succinctly on the cars that are in front of them and the overall environment. Okay. So the car is going to go quite a bit slower. There's uncertainty involved. And people are going to basically be kind of hedging their bets, if you will. Okay. But you come out of that fog bank, and what do? Well, you turn the radio back up. You've got the convertible top down, and you're going to be maintaining your speed of 70 miles an hour on your way up to Washington. So, the difference in understanding what the environment is and where you're headed and how clearly you're going to get there and how safely you're going to get there, it makes a big difference in how that car moves, but it also makes a huge difference as far as how the business moves forward. So in a fragile culture, you're typically going to find leadership teams that are softening clarity to avoid discomfort. Okay. People are not quite as direct with the instructions that are given or the clarity of the vision that they are supposed to be conveying to the employees. Okay. When you've got a fearless culture, on the other hand, there's significant clarity on what's important. Okay. Even when it's hard. So there are times where people may need to be redirected, or they may need to have, what I consider courageous conversations where we understand very clearly, this is our target. This is what we're going to work toward. And regardless of what's happening in in whatever dysfunction is occurring, we've got to continually move this ball forward toward the goal. Okay. It's all about making sure that there is clarity from the top of the organization all the way down to the lowest levels. Okay. That's also creating alignment. So some things that you can do practically along this line. Number one, you can ask your team, what are we trying to achieve? Okay. What is expected of us? And how will success be measured? If you can ask those three questions of your team from the top all the way down to the lowest levels, you'll find out pretty clearly whether you've got a truly courageous and fearless culture. Okay. If the lowest level of employee can't articulate what you're working toward and what you're working to achieve and what your highest priorities are, then you're never going to have the power that's required to truly scale that organization. So drive that clarity as far and deeply into the organization as you possibly can. Okay. Confused teams can't commit. Clear teams are the ones that move fast. Okay. Second, there's a term out there that we use frequently, and you may have heard of it before, but it's called psychological safety. And psychological safety is all about the ability for someone to bring their full selves forward. Okay, warts and all, but it's enabling people to basically step forward in, let's say, a team meeting, for example, or a high pressure situation, and fully contribute rather than pulling back and protecting themselves. Okay. So in a fragile organization, fear is often a means of controlling. We might have, let's say, a meeting with a full team in an organization. And if there's a sense of fear in that meeting, then people are tending to just let the most powerful person in the room speak. They may not contribute their full ideas. They may begin criticizing others. They may actually kind of dissuade people from communicating openly. Okay. In a fearless culture, on the other hand, it's safety to fully contribute. Okay. Or it's safe for them to fully contribute. And this is where people are not afraid to bring up ideas, whether they're good ideas, whether they're questionable ideas, what have you. And there's a time and place for everything, obviously. But when people are truly empowered and welcomed and not criticized for bringing their full ideas forward, even if those ideas are counter to what leadership is saying, then that's where you get into true power in an organizational culture. Okay. So psychological safety plus accountability. And accountability, as you all know, is voluntarily taking responsibility for something important. Okay. That's where you lead to an even higher levels of performance. Without safety, you have fear. But without accountability, you have chaos. But together, if you've got safety and accountability, then you've got trust, you've got truth, and you've got traction. And those are the three things that are critically important to really move a business forward. So fearless cultures are honest and they're responsible. Okay. The next one, normalize disagreement. Now, if you're like most people, you may not always enjoy the idea of getting into a disagreement, let alone an argument. Okay. Now, in some companies, we find the yes men. And these are people who are just basically going along. They'll say yes to anything that an executive wants to do, or other people who are necessarily powerful in the organization, whether formally or informally. But they're the ones that are always kind of brown-nosing, if you will, for lack of a better term. And these individuals are not typically going to help the business really thrive. Okay. Now, at the same time, you have somebody who can become highly heated. Okay. This is Crazy Charlie, and he's the one that's basically letting anyone have it if he has a disagreement with them. Okay. Or you have this type of leader in a room who chooses to lead not necessarily with his vision and with his capability and charisma, but instead with a sense of fear. Okay. These are not what you want. What you want is a situation where you're not avoiding conflict, where there's welcome dissent. Okay. Now, if you're thinking about this from a leadership view, the first question that's immediately coming to your mind, I'm sure, is, well, do I really want dissent in my organization? Well, not necessarily dissent in its full and uncontrolled form, but what you want is a situation where people are fearless to bring ideas forward, even if they are not necessarily your ideas. Because let's face it, if you hire the right people in your company or your organization, you need to expect them to bring new ideas and different ideas forward so that you can actually take advantage of those best ideas and not only remove needless risk, but also take advantage of situations where the market might be changing and you've got the ability to execute even more fully. Okay. If everybody is automatically agreeing with you, then you probably have the wrong people in the room with you. Okay. Disagreement sharpens decisions. Okay. So what I'd encourage you to do is to try this on a monthly basis. Ask your team and be open to their responses, by the way. Ask them, what's not working? Okay. What are we pretending not to know? What would our competitors say we're getting wrong? And what's one thing that no one wants to say out loud right now? Okay, now it'll take a little bit of prodding to kind of get below the surface and get beyond the looks that people are going to give you when you first start asking these questions. Okay, because there's going to be some uncertainty, if you will, in how to answer these questions. But I would step back and I would encourage them to really be honest and to bring their ideas forward so that we can improve as a team. Okay. So conflict is fuel if you normalize it. We're not looking for a situation where people are going to just fly off the handle, okay, or create additional dysfunction in the organization. But what we are looking for is for people to bring these ideas forward and to sometimes argue their point. And that's perfectly fine as long as it's done in a respectful and dignified manner. Okay. But you want the best ideas brought forward, and you want people to dissent if necessary to make sure that those best ideas are heard. Okay. After they're heard, well, then you can make a decision collectively on how to move forward. But the key is to at least allow them to be brought to the top. Okay. Practice number 4 is peer accountability. In many cases, what we find is that leadership tends to think about accountability from the standpoint of top down. Okay. I'm a supervisor. I've got responsibility for my team. I'm going to make sure that they deliver on X, Y, and Z because that's what they've agreed to do. The challenge with that is it's not always healthy. Okay. And it's not going to create the type of collaboration that's necessary to really move your business forward to the next higher level. The key is to create something called peer accountability. And this is where peers are beginning to hold each other accountable instead of always relying on leadership to drive accountability downward. Peer accountability happens where teams hold each other accountable to shared goals and behavior. Okay. Accountability must go peer to peer if you truly want to scale your business. And the reason is, number one, a senior leader has only so much bandwidth. And if they're consistently relying on pushing accountability down in the organization, number one, it's draining. Okay. Number two, it's not productive. If you're waiting for your once a year annual performance reviews to come along in order to make sure that accountability is in place, it's not going to happen. It's not going to create the type of environment that you're really wanting. So the key is to make sure that people are holding each other accountable. We find that it's typically best to work in trios, okay, where you've got 3 peers, and I say peers intentionally. So individuals who are roughly the same level in the organization, who can lift up one another, who can drive accountability, who can hold each other accountable and use positive responsibility for situations where there are agreements made. And if things start to slide, or if things are not being accomplished as readily as they need to be, well, that's where the peer accountability comes into play, because they can bring everything back in the direction where it needs to be. Okay, so this is all about shared ownership, and it's about leaderless follow through. So when peers challenge peers, culture scales. So make sure that you're hiring the right people for the job, and then make sure that you empower them to hold each other accountable to actually execute on the job that they've been given. Okay. Another practice, of course, is resilient rituals. So we all know that, especially in today's business environment, things can get, well, let's say challenging. You've got layoffs in the oil and gas industry. You've got market conditions that are tight. You've got people experiencing, for example, in some cases, it's the family generation or the sandwich generation, where you've got people at home or parents who are taking care of both children and elderly parents. You can have situations where in the past we've had a pandemic to deal with, okay? And not to mention the day-by-day stresses of being able to accomplish everything else that's on your plate. Okay. That, as everybody knows, can truly wear you down over time. But the key is to establish resilient rituals, the things that are going to empower a team to stay strong when things are tough. Okay. I have one client in particular right now that is really going through a challenging time. Unfortunately, they've just lost a staff member. And I'm extremely proud of them because one of the things that I'm noticing is that because of these rituals that they had built into the organization, everyone around that individual's position is now picking up the slack and moving things forward, not because they're told that they have to, but because they want to, because they see the true vision of what can be accomplished in the organization, and they want to take care of each other to make sure that that organization thrives. That's a powerful culture. That's a group who's resilient, okay, who understands that when things get tough, it's not time to let everything fall apart and create dysfunction. It's time to actually pull together and to become stronger as a result of it. So in a fragile culture, you often have dependence on adrenaline. And what I mean by that is you've got a challenge in front of you. You're going to hit it as hard as you possibly can. And you're going to just allow your adrenaline to drive the show. Okay. The challenge with adrenaline is that it only lasts for so long. And then what's left when you're depleted? Well, in a fearless organization, you have execution, you have recovery, and you have repetition. And that continual pattern allows people to build confidence and strength and stamina and courage to be able to lean on one another in times where things do become difficult. Okay. If you want to really build a rhythm that is going to propel your business forward, you have to build resilience into it. And the thing that's tough for a lot of business leaders to understand is that resilience is not created right when you're in the heart of a situation. The time that you want to build resilience is long beforehand. So if you can incrementally create positive and productive challenges to stretch people a little bit, to cause them to rely on each other and collaborate more effectively, to see the greater purpose in the business and lean in toward it. Okay. If you can address the resilience well before the time that it's actually needed, then it's going to be present when you actually need it to kick in. Okay. So some examples of things that you may want to do, and these are really pretty simple ideas, but they're ways to continually build the resilience in your team. Number one might be wins and worries Mondays. So a time where your team can come together and talk about what are the positive things that are happening in the organization. Who's bringing in a win in particular? What are the things that we can celebrate as a group? What's going well? Okay. But at the same time, balance that with saying, okay, what are we facing at the moment? What do we believe is the next challenge that we're needing to prepare for? And what is worrying us about that next step that we're needing to take? Okay. Or if there are problems that people are experiencing, I'm not talking about bringing a dump truck in and just, dumping everything out on the floor. But what I'm saying is if there are issues that are creating tension or a challenge in your team, then figure out a way to bring them forward and talk about them productively. You can also have 10-minute debriefs. I really encourage these for supervisors or direct leaders at the end of each day, if at all possible. These are simple 10-minute conversations with your team, just to say, hey, what's happening today? What's been working? What's not been working? What do we need to focus on tomorrow? And how are we going to attack it even more fully? Okay. You can also have micro celebrations. I know as well as anybody that when you're in the heart of a full-blown execution and you've got to be pushing and pushing and pushing to get the job done, it becomes so easy to just let the accomplishments kind of pile up without being recognized, but you're missing an opportunity. People really love to be listened to and they love to be acknowledged. Okay. And if you can tap into that and actually acknowledge someone when there is something to celebrate, okay, that's a very powerful tool. One of the other clients that I'm working with at the moment uses or sets us apart time within their weekly meetings where we talk about empathy and communication and displays of the company's core values. And it's an opportunity for people to recognize one another for the work that they're doing and for the way that they're actually delivering as far as the core values are concerned. It's brilliant, and it's caused a lot of very healthy conversation in the organization. And it's also created a situation where people are more willing to rely on each other, because even though they can talk with each other when things are a challenge and when accountability is not working properly, they can also rely on each other to come around and acknowledge them when things are going well. The balance between those two creates the healthy conversation and communication. Okay. And then finally, truth check-ins. These are opportunities for people just simply to talk with the leader or talk with each other about what's really going on. Okay. What is the truth that nobody really wants to talk about? What are the things that are causing dysfunction or challenges along the way? Okay. Those are our brief truth check-ins. So if you have the rituals, then you get the resilience on autopilot. These types of things have to happen on a regular basis for them to become a pattern in the organization. You've already hired the best people that you possibly can. Now it's time to build them into a stronger team that actually communicates productively and proactively. Okay. I'm going to give you just one other practice that I believe is extremely healthy. And that's, as much as it controls on you, avoid silos in your organization. Okay. As much as it's so easy to, for example, let a phenomenal sales team create their own silo in their own world. And, as a sales manager, well, I trust you that you've got control of it. Just keep it running. The challenge is that when there's a lack of collaboration between other departments and sales, as an example, or it could be operations and sales, or operations and marketing, or operations and logistics, what have you. If there's a lack of collaboration between those groups, then you're going to falter as an organization, because communication doesn't flow the way that it's needed to, and accountability is lessened. So be sure to focus on eliminating silos wherever you possibly can. Okay. That's oftentimes a challenge for teams, but it's critically important. So when you have all of this information together and you think about these practices that can create a fearless culture, the thing to remember is that now you have to think about the integration of it. Okay. So my recommendation is to take a little bit of time, pick the weakest practice that you see in your organization. That becomes your leverage point. Okay. And I'll explain that in just a moment. So focus on fixing it, reinforcing it, and then watching the momentum build, because culture change begins where the pain is the greatest. If you can attack the one or two things that are especially critical for your culture right now, that's where culture change begins. It's not always the easiest thing to do, but it's the most important thing to do. And it's the way to set up the creation of a positive, productive, and fearless culture. Okay. I'm going to provide in the notes, or if you need to, you can enter your email into the comment section, and I'll be more than happy to send this over to you. I'm going to actually send you 2 bonus materials today. One is going to be a culture audit. It's a 20-question survey that simply allows you to judge where is your culture currently on a scale of fragile to fearless, or also, if you look at it from a different angle, from complacency to compliance to cooperation, commitment, and courageous cultures. So it'll be 20 questions. It'll describe everything in the view of those 5 culture states. It'll provide some executive level clarity, because what I'd encourage you to do is not only ask yourself these questions, ask the people around you, and then take it to leadership, or as a leadership, member, bring it to your leadership team and discuss it. Figure out what are the things that we really need to do in order to move this business forward courageously. Okay. I'll give you an actionable next step here in just a moment. The thing to remember is that your culture is already shaping your results. Okay. It's already happening. The most important thing that you can do is to be intentional about it. Okay. So just a brief plug, I'll let you know that there is a program called Climb Cultures. And this is a program that was developed several years ago where we bring executive teams together for a 2-day experience. And we basically focus on everything that's necessary from the standpoint of a methodology to build a courageous organizational culture. Okay. This is not leadership training per se. This is an actual methodology that you follow that will guide you step by step in how to implement a courageous culture. So it really transforms how organizations work together, and it focuses on really 6 different elements of an organization. So leadership, accountability, decision-making, collaboration, resilience, and innovation. Now, those can also be leadership topics, but here's the difference and the distinction between the two. Okay. In the Climb program, we're not only talking about the value, for example, of leadership or skills that leaders develop. What we're talking about is how does leadership infuse the actual courageous culture into the organization? Okay. How do we build the accountability structures that are going to support that organization moving forward? How do we empower people to make the decisions that are necessary to become stronger? How do we make sure that people are collaborating with each other? And then you've also got resilience and innovation, of course. Okay. The fact is, there's a cost of standing still. All right. You've got the fact that your culture will drift. And if you're not intentionally focusing on it, the culture is going to drift toward things that are less productive and, in essence, toward dysfunction more often than toward a highly functional setup. Okay. As a result, the best people leave and others tend to disengage. Performance drops and pressure increases. Truth disappears and growth stalls. And then you pay the culture tax quietly and painfully. Okay. If you're not leading your culture intentionally, it's going to create a long-term challenge for you. So I know that you can do it. There are steps and practices that you can put in place, but the key is to get started. Okay. So let's get practical. Complete the culture audit, share it with your leadership team, address the weakest practice, focusing on progress and not perfection, schedule your Climb Cultures discovery session. And if you have an interest in talking about the Climb Cultures program, I make it super simple. All you have to do is enter your email into the comments section, and I'll reach right out to you. Okay. And then make sure that we're continuing to build a stronger culture. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope that you have a phenomenal Thanksgiving. I hope it's a great time with your family, and that you stay safe. Kelly, you're muted, unfortunately.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing your insights today. I especially love the phrase, build resilience into the rhythm. That really kind of resounded with me. I think it was very eye-opening to hear all of the, the 5 steps. But I hope that this and the insights that you brought and shared today really give our audience practical skills and tools to strengthen their teams and build a culture that truly thrives under pressure. We appreciate your time, your engagement, and your commitment to leading with courage. On behalf of our team at the Tomball Economic Development Corporation, we wish you a wonderful holiday season and a very happy Thanksgiving. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.